In an isolated mansion, a millionaire lives with the pain of losing his wife and the silence of his daughter, diagnosed with autism. Desperate after years of making no progress, he agrees to hire a young nanny with no qualifications but a different outlook. Watching her care for the girl with patience and affection, he hears a phrase that disarms him. "Sir, your daughter is not autistic. She just needs love." What happens over the next few days changes not only the girl, but also the heart of a man who no longer believed in new beginnings. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The evening light filtered through the tall windows of Willow Heights mansion, casting long shadows across the empty hallways. Alexander Bennett stood in his study, his fingers absently tracing the spine of an old leather-bound book. The grandfather clock's steady ticking echoed through the room, a reminder of time's relentless march forward, even when life seemed frozen in place. Outside his window, autumn painted the extensive grounds in amber and gold, but the beauty was lost on him. His attention was fixed on a small figure sitting alone in the garden, his daughter Emma. She sat perfectly still, her dark hair moving slightly in the breeze, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. The sight made his chest tighten with a familiar ache. "Mr. Bennett?" Martha, the housekeeper, spoke softly from the doorway, careful not to startle him. "Dr. Richardson's office called. They need to reschedule tomorrow's appointment." Alexander nodded without turning around. "Cancel it altogether, Martha. We've seen enough specialists." His voice carried the weight of exhaustion, of too many disappointing consultations and failed attempts at breakthrough. For 3 years, he had watched his daughter retreat further into herself. Emma, once a vibrant child who filled the halls with laughter and endless questions, had become a silent observer of the world. The change had been gradual at first: missed words, avoided eye contact, increasing isolation. Then came the diagnosis: autism. A word that seemed to build an invisible wall between them, growing higher with each passing day. The sound of classical music drifted up from downstairs, Emma's piano teacher attempting another session. Alexander already knew how it would end. In 15 minutes, the teacher would quietly pack up her things, offer a sympathetic smile, and add her name to the long list of professionals who couldn't reach his daughter. He loosened his tie and sat heavily in his leather chair, surrounded by the trappings of success that meant nothing now. The tech company he'd built from the ground up continued to thrive, but he barely noticed anymore. His focus had narrowed to one singular mission: finding a way to connect with Emma. The piano music stopped abruptly. Right on schedule, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps in the hallway, followed by the gentle closing of the front door. Another failed attempt. Martha appeared again, this time with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "Sir, perhaps it's time to try something different." Alexander raised an eyebrow. Martha had been with the family for over a decade, and she rarely offered unsolicited advice. "What do you mean?" She placed the coffee on his desk, choosing her words carefully. "My sister's friend works with special needs children, not as a therapist or doctor, just as a caregiver. She has this way about her. Sometimes it's not the credentials that matter most, but the heart." He would have dismissed the suggestion immediately a year ago. But now, watching Emma through the window as she traced patterns in the fallen leaves, he felt something shift inside him. The parade of specialists with their degrees and theories had brought them no closer to breakthrough. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. "Tell me more about this person," he said, finally turning to face Martha. The housekeeper's face brightened slightly. "Her name is Sarah Chen. She's young, only 24, but she has experience caring for her younger siblings, one of whom is on the spectrum. She's not formally trained, but—" "Set up a meeting," Alexander interrupted, surprising himself with the decisiveness in his voice. "Tomorrow, if possible." That night, after ensuring Emma was settled in her room with her favorite star-shaped nightlight casting gentle patterns on the wall, Alexander found himself in his wife's old art studio. He hadn't entered the room in months, but something drew him there now. canvas sheets draped over forgotten paintings, her easel stood sentinel in the corner, and her favorite brushes remained arranged precisely as she'd left them. He picked up one of her journals, opening it to a random page. Claire's elegant handwriting filled the margins with observations about Emma as a toddler, her favorite songs, the way she danced, how she always noticed the smallest details in everything. Looking back, there had been signs they hadn't recognized, patterns they hadn't understood. Claire would have known what to do. She always knew how to reach their daughter. A soft sound at the doorway made him turn. Emma stood there in her pajamas, holding her worn stuffed elephant. She didn't enter. She never did anymore. But she watched him with those intense brown eyes that seemed to hold so many unspoken words. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, not expecting a response. "Can't sleep?" Emma's gaze shifted to the easel, then back to him. Without a word, she turned and padded back to her room, leaving Alexander with the familiar mixture of hope and heartache that defined their relationship now. He looked down at Claire's journal again, running his fingers over her last entry. Love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, the shared breaths, the simple act of being present. Emma speaks her own language. We just need to learn how to listen. Tomorrow he would meet Sarah Chen. Tomorrow they would try something new. For now, he closed the journal gently and turned off the studio light, leaving Claire's sanctuary to its peaceful rest. In the hallway, he paused outside Emma's room, listening to her soft breathing through the partially open door. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, more to himself than to his sleeping daughter. "I promise." Sarah Chen stood at the gates of Willow Heights, her heart beating a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The mansion loomed before her, its Victorian architecture, impressive but somehow melancholic in the morning light. She adjusted her simple blue cardigan, suddenly conscious of how ordinary she must look, compared to the parade of specialists who had preceded her. The intercom crackled to life, and a warm female voice welcomed her inside. As she walked up the winding driveway, Sarah reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't about impressing anyone with credentials she didn't have. It was about connecting with a child who needed someone to understand her world. Martha, the housekeeper who had called her, met her at the door with a kind smile. "Mr. Bennett is in his study. Emma is in the garden. She spends most mornings there." Sarah followed Martha through the house, taking in the subtle signs of a home frozen in time. Family photos lined the walls, but they stopped abruptly, 3 years ago, as if someone had drawn an invisible line between then and now. In each progressive image, she noticed the subtle changes in the little girl's expression, the gradual fading of her smile. Alexander Bennett cut an imposing figure behind his desk, but Sarah noticed the shadows under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he gestured for her to sit. She had expected a formal interview. Instead, he simply asked, "Why do you want to work with Emma?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. She could have given him the professional answer, talked about her experience with her brother Michael, or listed the techniques she'd learned. Instead, she chose honesty. "Because every child deserves someone who sees them, not just their diagnosis," she said quietly. "Someone who has the time and patience to learn their language, whatever that might be." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Emma sat beneath an old oak tree. "Everyone wants to fix her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The specialists, the therapists, they all come with their methods and theories. But she's not broken. She's just different. I've forgotten how to reach her." Sarah joined him at the window, watching the little girl methodically arranging fallen leaves in patterns only she understood. "Maybe we're the ones who need to learn a new way of reaching out," she suggested. Alexander turned to study her face, as if searching for something. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "When can you start?" "Now," Sarah replied without hesitation. "If that's all right." He nodded, then handed her a thick folder, Emma's file filled with evaluations and reports. "You should probably read this first." Sarah took the folder but set it aside. "I'd rather meet Emma first, if you don't mind." Sometimes it's better to see with fresh eyes. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. He led her to the garden but stopped at the French doors. "I should warn you, she doesn't interact with new people. I don't expect anything," Sarah interrupted, gently. "I just want to be present." The autumn air was crisp as Sarah stepped into the garden. Emma didn't look up, completely absorbed in her leaf arrangement. Instead of approaching directly, Sarah chose a spot several feet away and sat down on the grass. From her bag, she pulled out a worn copy of The Little Prince and began to read quietly to herself. She was aware of Alexander watching from the doorway, probably wondering what she was doing. But Sarah had learned from Michael that sometimes the best way to connect was to simply share space, to exist in someone's world without demanding entry. After a few minutes, she noticed Emma's hands pause in their movement. The girl's head tilted slightly, though she didn't look directly at Sarah. Taking this as a sign, Sarah began reading aloud, keeping her voice soft and steady. "And now, here is my secret, a very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Emma's fingers resumed their dance with the leaves, but her movements had changed subtly, almost as if they were following the rhythm of Sarah's words. For nearly an hour, they remained like this, Sarah reading, Emma arranging her leaves, neither acknowledging the other directly, but sharing the same peaceful space. When Martha called Emma in for lunch, the girl stood without protest. As she passed Sarah, her hand briefly brushed against the book's pages. The smallest of gestures, but in that moment, it felt like the opening of a door. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat with Alexander in his study, discussing schedules and arrangements. He seemed different now, less guarded, as if seeing Emma's subtle response had awakened something in him. "There's a guest house on the property," he said, looking through some papers. "It's small but comfortable. If you're willing to be here full-time..." "Yes," Sarah answered, surprising herself with her certainty. Something about this place, this family, called to her. It wasn't just about helping Emma, it was about helping all of them find their way back to each other. As she left that evening, Sarah paused at the garden gate, looking back at the mansion. In an upstairs window, she caught a glimpse of Emma watching her leave. The girl didn't wave or smile, but she pressed her hand against the glass, the same hand that had touched the book earlier. Sarah touched her own hand to her heart in response. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were the most important part of any story. The guest house settled into a gentle quiet as Sarah unpacked her few belongings. Through the window, she could see the main house glowing, softly in the twilight, its windows like warm eyes in the gathering dusk. Her first week at Willow Heights had passed in a blur of careful observations and tentative beginnings. Every morning, she would find Emma in her usual spot in the garden, and their quiet ritual would begin. Sarah learned to gauge the day by subtle signs, the way Emma's shoulders tensed or relaxed, how close she chose to sit, the patterns she created with her leaves or stones. Some days, the girl remained distant, locked in her private world. Other days, she allowed Sarah to exist a little closer to her carefully drawn boundaries. On this particular evening, Sarah sat at her small desk, writing in her journal about the day's small victory. Emma had actually looked at her during story time, making brief but deliberate eye contact before returning to her puzzle. Such a tiny gesture might seem insignificant to others, but Sarah recognized it for what it was, a door cracking open ever so slightly. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alexander stood in the doorway, looking somewhat out of place in his casual weekend attire. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, holding up a folder. "I found some of Emma's old drawings. I thought they might help you understand who she was before." Sarah welcomed him in, clearing space on her small coffee table. As Alexander spread out the drawings, his fingers lingered on each one with obvious tenderness. "She used to draw constantly," he explained, his voice soft with memory. "Everything she saw, everything she imagined. The walls of her room were covered with her artwork." Together they examined the progression of drawings. The earlier ones burst with color and life, fantastic creatures, swirling landscapes, Family portraits where everyone had exaggerated smiles and sparkling eyes. But Sarah noticed how the images gradually changed. The colors became more muted, the figures more isolated until they stopped altogether. "When did she stop drawing?" Sarah asked gently. Alexander's hand trembled slightly as he touched the last drawing in the pile, a simple sketch of 3 stick figures holding hands. "About 3 years ago, after Claire." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Sarah studied the final drawing more closely. Despite its simplicity, there was something haunting about it. The way the figures seemed to be both together and separate, connected but isolated. "May I keep this one?" she asked. "I have an idea." The next morning, Sarah broke from their usual routine. Instead of bringing a book to the garden, she carried her own sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. Emma was in her usual spot, but today she was arranging small stones in a spiral pattern. Sarah sat down and began to draw, making sure the scratching of her pencil was just loud enough to be heard. She wasn't trying to recreate Emma's old style. Instead, she drew what she saw: the garden, the stones, the quiet girl whose presence had begun to feel as natural as the autumn breeze. After a while, she felt Emma's attention shift. The girl's hands stilled on her stones, her head tilted slightly in Sarah's direction. Without looking up, Sarah carefully tore the page from her sketchbook and set it on the grass between them, along with a blue pencil. She had noticed Emma's eyes often lingered on blue objects. Minutes passed in weighted silence. Then, moving with the deliberate grace that characterized all her actions, Emma reached for the pencil. She didn't draw right away. Instead, she held it the way someone might hold a precious artifact, running her fingers along its length as if reacquainting herself with a long-lost friend. From his study window, Alexander watched the scene unfold. His chest tightened as Emma finally put pencil to paper, adding her own marks to Sarah's drawing. They weren't the vibrant illustrations of before, but they were something new, something honest. Later that afternoon, Sarah found a surprise. On her desk in the guest house, a small stone perfectly round and smooth placed carefully in the center. She recognized it from Emma's spiral pattern in the garden. Looking up, she caught a glimpse of movement at her window, a small figure hurrying back toward the main house. That evening, Alexander called Sarah to his study. He seemed different, less rigid, more animated. "Emma asked for her old art supplies," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It's been years since she showed any interest." Sarah smiled, thinking of the stone on her desk. "She never stopped being an artist, Mr. Bennett. She just needed to find her own way back to it." "Alexander," he corrected softly. "Please call me Alexander." There was something in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something else, something that made her heart beat a little faster. As Sarah walked back to the guest house that night, she paused in the garden. The stone spiral Emma had created remained undisturbed, except for the single space where the gift stone had been. In its place was a small origami crane made from a page of The Little Prince. Sarah picked it up carefully, understanding the significance of this exchange. Emma wasn't just communicating. She was creating a new language, one made of stones and paper birds, of shared silences and careful offerings. And somehow, Sarah found herself fluent in this wordless dialogue, this gentle dance of understanding. That was slowly bringing light back to Willow Heights. The music room had been closed for years, its grand piano gathering dust beneath a heavy cover. But on this crisp October morning, Sarah stood in the doorway, drawn by an inexplicable urge to enter. The room held a different kind of silence than the rest of the house, not empty, but waiting. Martha found her there, running her fingers along the piano's covered keys. "You play?" the housekeeper asked, startling Sarah from her reverie. "I used to," Sarah admitted. "My grandmother taught me. Nothing fancy, just simple melodies." She smiled at the memory of long afternoons spent at her grandmother's old upright piano, learning to translate emotion into music. Martha's eyes lit up. "Mrs. Clare, Emma's mother, she played every day. Emma used to sit right there, She pointed to a window seat. And watch for hours. After, well, we couldn't even mention music without Emma becoming upset. Sarah absorbed this information carefully, adding it to her growing understanding of Emma's world. Would it be all right if I uncovered it? She asked, her hand resting on the piano's draped form. Martha hesitated. Mr. Bennett usually doesn't, but he's at the office today, and Emma's with her art therapist, perhaps just for a moment. Together, they carefully removed the cover, revealing the piano's gleaming surface. Sarah sat down, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys without pressing them. She could almost feel the history of the instrument, the countless melodies it had carried, the joy it had once brought to this room. A small sound made them both turn. Emma stood in the doorway, her art therapy session apparently finished early. Sarah's heart skipped. She hadn't meant for Emma to find her here, in this space so deeply connected to her mother. But instead of running away or showing distress, Emma slowly entered the room. Her movements were cautious but deliberate, like a deer stepping into a familiar clearing that had changed somehow. Sarah remained perfectly still as Emma approached the key. Te piano. The girl reached out and pressed a single key, letting the note ring out in the quiet room. Then another. Not random notes, Sarah realized, but a specific pattern. The beginning of a lullaby. Without thinking, Sarah's hands moved to complete the melody Emma had started. The girl's eyes widened, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed another key, adding to the simple tune. Together, they created a gentle harmony, Emma picking out single notes, Sarah providing the subtle accompaniment. Martha watched. From the doorway, tears streaming down her face as music filled Willow Heights for the first time in 3 years. When Alexander returned home that evening, he heard the faint sound of piano music drifting from upstairs. His first instinct was pain, the familiar ache of remembering Claire at the piano, Emma at her side. But as he climbed the stairs, he realized something was different about this music. It was simpler, hesitant, like a conversation between two shy strangers. He found them in the music room, Sarah and Emma sitting side by side on the piano bench. They weren't playing now, but Emma was arranging small origami figures on the music stand, birds and stars she had learned to fold. During her art therapy sessions, Sarah watched, occasionally humming a soft tune that Emma would echo with single piano notes. Neither of them noticed him at first, and Alexander found himself holding his breath, afraid to break the spell of this moment. He had never seen Emma so at ease with another person, so present in the shared space of connection. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Alexander found Sarah in the garden, collecting the day's scattered art supplies. "I should apologize," she said when she saw him. "I know the music room was off limits." But Alexander shook his head, moving to help her gather colored pencils from the grass. "You have nothing to apologize for. Today was the first time I've seen her truly engaged with music since—" He paused, then continued softly, "Claire would have loved this." Their hands met, reaching for the same pencil, and for a moment, neither pulled away. The evening air was cool, but Alexander felt warmth spread through his chest. Sarah's presence had brought something unexpected to Willow Heights, not just help for Emma, but a gentle awakening for all of them. "Would you join us for dinner tomorrow?" he asked suddenly. "Not in the formal dining room, but maybe something casual in the kitchen. Emma seems more comfortable there, and I thought—" "I'd like that," Sarah interrupted gently, saving him from his nervous rambling. Their eyes met in the gathering dusk, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the delicate balance they were all creating together. As they walked back to the house, Emma's origami crane caught the last light of day from its perch on the piano's music stand, casting a small, perfect shadow. Like the notes they had played together, like the art slowly returning to Emma's world, like the quiet understanding growing between Sarah and Alexander. It was a small thing, but it held the promise of something beautiful taking flight. The kitchen filled with warm aromas as Sarah taught Emma how to make her grandmother's sugar cookies. It had started as a simple attempt to involve Emma in a new activity, but it had turned into something more, a weekly ritual that brought subtle changes to their dynamic. Emma stood on a step stool, carefully measuring flour with intense concentration. Her movements were precise, methodical, as if each gram had to be perfect. Sarah had learned to respect this attention to detail, understanding that it wasn't just about control, it was Emma's way of engaging with the world. "That's exactly right," Sarah encouraged softly as Emma leveled the flour with the edge of a knife. A small smile flickered across the girl's face. These moments of praise had become more frequent, and Emma had begun to respond to them in her own quiet way. Alexander leaned against the doorframe, watching them work together. These days, he found himself lingering in rooms where Sarah and Emma spent time, drawn to the gentle atmosphere they created. The kitchen, once a place of rushed meals and silence, had become the heart of their evolving family dynamic. "Daddy." Emma's voice was soft but clear. She had started speaking more often, though usually only in these comfortable moments when it was just the three of them. "Can you help?" Alexander's heart swelled as it did every time she spoke directly to him. He crossed the kitchen, accepting the rolling pin she offered. Sarah stepped back slightly, giving father and daughter space to work together, but remaining close enough that Emma could feel her reassuring presence. As they rolled out the cookie dough, Emma began humming, a new habit she had developed since their discovery in the music room. It was the lullaby she and Sarah often played together, the simple melody that had become their special song. "I think Claire would have loved these moments," Alexander said quietly to Sarah as Emma carefully cut star shapes from the dough. "She always wanted the kitchen to be like this." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest at the way he spoke about Claire now, with love and remembrance, but without the crushing weight of grief that had been there when she first arrived. "Tell me about her?" she asked gently. Alexander's hands stilled on the rolling pin. She was radiant. Everything she touched seemed to come alive. She could spend hours in her art studio, then come down and create the most amazing meals, all while singing off-key. He chuckled softly at the memory. "Emma gets her attention to detail from her. Claire never did anything halfway." Emma looked up at the mention of her mother's name, her eyes moving between Sarah and her father. Then, unexpectedly, she reached for Sarah's hand, pulling her closer to where they worked. It was a deliberate gesture of inclusion that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The afternoon light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns on the flour-dusted counter. As they worked together, Sarah realized how natural this felt, not like she was trying to replace anyone, but like she was helping to create something new, something that honored the past while embracing the present. Later, as the cookies baked, Emma sat at the kitchen table drawing. Her art had evolved over the past weeks, no longer just abstract patterns, but detailed scenes of their daily life. Today's drawing showed three figures in the kitchen, surrounded by stars and musical notes. "Look," Emma said, pushing the drawing towards Sarah and her father. Alexander's breath caught. It was the first time Emma had drawn their family since Claire's passing. But what struck him most was how she had drawn Sarah, not separate, not as an outsider, but fully integrated into their world, her figure, wrapped in the same warm colors she used for herself and her father. Sarah touched the drawing gently, understanding the significance of this moment. Emma had chosen to make her part of their story, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as something new and precious in its own right. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. His hand found Sarah's under the table, squeezing gently. The touch was brief but electric, full of unspoken feelings that had been growing between them. The timer chimed, and Emma jumped up excitedly, another new behavior that delighted them both. As they arranged the star-shaped cookies on cooling racks, Sarah noticed how Emma placed them in specific patterns, creating constellations of sugar and warmth. "Can we take some to Mother's garden?" Emma asked suddenly, looking at her father. The question hung in the air. Emma had never before shown interest in visiting the small memorial garden they had created for Claire. Alexander knelt beside his daughter, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Emma nodded, then turned to Sarah. "Will you come too?" Sarah felt the weight of this invitation, the trust it represented, the boundaries it crossed. "I'd be honored," she said softly. As they prepared a small plate of cookies, Sarah watched father and daughter moving around the kitchen with newfound ease. The healing wasn't happening in grand gestures or breakthrough moments, but in these small acts of inclusion, these quiet offerings of trust and love. The kitchen timer chimed again, but this time it wasn't for cookies. It was the sound of another wall coming down, another step forward in their journey together. Outside, the autumn sun painted the memorial garden in golden light, as if nature itself was blessing this moment of connection, this gentle blending of past and present into something beautiful and new. The memorial garden was a small, secluded space behind the main house, where Claire's favorite roses still bloomed under Martha's careful tending. As they approached, Sarah held back slightly, allowing Alexander and Emma to lead the way. This was their sacred space, and she would follow their lead. Emma carried the plate of cookies with the same careful precision she brought to all her tasks. Her steps were steady, purposeful, as if she had been preparing for this moment without anyone realizing it. Alexander walked beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder, ready to support, but not impose. The garden was beautiful in its autumn splendor, with late blooming flowers adding touches of color to the seasonal browns and golds. A small stone bench sat beneath an arch covered in climbing roses, and beside it stood a delicate bird bath that Claire had painted herself. Emma stopped at the entrance, her grip tightening slightly on the plate. Sarah could see the tension in her small shoulders, the way her breathing had become more measured. But instead of retreating as she might have done weeks ago, Emma looked back at Sarah, seeking reassurance. "I'm right here," Sarah said softly. "We can take as much time as you need." Something in Emma seemed to settle at these words. She moved forward again, approaching the bench where she and her mother had once spent countless hours reading together. With deliberate care, she placed the plate of star-shaped cookies on the bench. "Mommy liked stars," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said they were like windows to heaven." Alexander made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. It was the first time Emma had spoken about Claire since that terrible day 3 years ago. Sarah fought the urge to go to them, understanding that this moment needed to unfold in its own way. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out one of her origami cranes. She had started carrying them everywhere, leaving them like breadcrumbs. Throughout the house, this one was made from music paper, the notes visible on its delicate wings. She placed it carefully among the cookies. "Can we play her song?" Emma asked, looking at Sarah. "Here?" Sarah glanced at Alexander, who nodded, wiping his eyes quickly. She began to hum the lullaby that had become their special music, and after a moment, Emma joined in. Their voices mingled with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds, creating a melody that seemed to embrace the garden in gentle harmony. As they sang, Emma began to speak, her words flowing between the notes of the lullaby. She told them about her memories of this place, how her mother had taught her the names of all the flowers, how they would have tea parties with her stuffed animals, how Claire would paint while Emma arranged petals in patterns on the ground. Alexander moved to sit on the bench, his legs seemingly unable to support him as he listened to his daughter share these precious memories. Sarah remained where she was, a respectful distance away, but Emma had other ideas. She reached back and took Sarah's hand, pulling her gently forward until all three of them were seated together. "Mommy would like the cookies," Emma said with certainty. "And she would like you, Sarah. You make Daddy smile again." The simple observation, delivered with a child's straightforward honesty, brought fresh tears to Alexander's eyes. He looked at Sarah, and in that moment, all the feelings they had been carefully navigating seemed to crystallize into something clear and undeniable. A light breeze stirred the garden, carrying the sweet scent of roses. The origami crane fluttered but remained in place, its wings catching the light like a small paper guardian. Emma leaned against Sarah's side, while her other hand held her father's. "Can we come here more?" Emma asked. "All of us?" Of course. Sweetheart, Alexander answered, his voice rough with emotion. Whenever you want. Sarah felt Emma relax against her, as if a great weight had been lifted. The girl had carried so much inside her, and now she was finally finding ways to share it, to bridge the gap between her inner world and the people who loved her. They sat together as the afternoon light softened, sharing cookies and memories. Emma hummed fragments of the lullaby, occasionally pointing out butterflies that visited the late-blooming flowers. Sarah noticed how she had arranged the remaining cookies in a pattern that mirrored the constellation of Cygnus, the swan, eternally flying across the night sky. As they prepared to leave, Emma placed one last cookie beside the origami crane. "For Mommy," she said simply. Then she took both Sarah's and Alexander's hands, leading them back toward the house where Martha had promised hot chocolate would be waiting. Behind them, the memorial garden seemed to glow in the fading light, as if Claire's spirit had indeed been present, blessing this moment of healing, this careful balance of remembrance and renewal. The origami crane's shadow stretched across the cookies like a bridge between past and present, a symbol of the new form of love taking shape within the walls of Willow Heights. The letter from Riverside Academy lay unopened on Alexander's desk. For 3 days. Sarah had noticed how his eyes kept drifting to it during their evening conversations, but she waited for him to bring it up. Finally, one evening, as they sat in the study reviewing Emma's progress, he handed it to her. "They have a program," he said quietly, watching her unfold the crisp paper. "For children like Emma." The director reached out after hearing about her progress from her art therapist. "Sarah, read through the letter carefully." Riverside was known for its innovative approach to education, with specialized programs that adapted to each child's unique way of learning. The letter described a gentle integration process, with emphasis on arts and music, areas where Emma had shown remarkable growth. "What does Emma think about this?" Sarah asked, noting how the program would only require attendance for half days initially. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had come to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "I haven't shown her yet. After everything. That happened at her last school." He trailed off, remembering the painful episodes that had led to their decision to homeschool Emma. "She's different now," Sarah said gently. "We're all different. Maybe it's worth exploring." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared in the doorway of the study. She had begun doing this more often, seeking them out instead of waiting to be found. In her hands, she clutched her latest art project, a complex collage of pressed flowers and musical notes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice clear and curious. Another change. She had started asking direct questions, showing interest in the world beyond her immediate space. Alexander and Sarah exchanged glances. "Come here, sweetheart," Alexander said, patting the space between them on the leather sofa. "There's something we'd like to discuss with you." Emma settled between them, spreading her collage across their laps. Sarah marveled at how the piece combined elements of structure and creativity. Musical staffs created precise lines, while flowers and watercolors flowed freely between them. It was a perfect representation of how Emma's mind worked, finding harmony between order and artistic expression. "There's a school," Alexander began carefully, "a special place where children make art and music and learn in ways that feel comfortable to them. Would you like to hear about it?" Emma's hands stilled on her artwork. She looked up at her father, then at Sarah, her eyes searching their faces. "Will they understand about the lights?" she asked, referring to her sensitivity to fluorescent lighting that had caused so much distress at her previous school. "They will," Sarah assured her, pointing to a section of the letter. "Look, they have natural lighting in all their classrooms, and quiet spaces where students can go when they need a break." Emma leaned forward, her interest piqued. Sarah began reading the letter aloud, watching as Emma's expression shifted from uncertainty to curiosity. When she reached the part about the school's music program, Emma's eyes lit up. "They have a whole room of instruments," Sarah explained, "and you can choose which ones you want to try." "Like Mommy's piano?" Emma asked softly. Alexander's breath caught, but his voice was steady when he answered. "Yes, sweetheart, just like that. And they have art studios too, with big windows that look out over gardens. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information in her methodical way. Then she pointed to a particular flower in her collage, a pressed rose from Claire's garden. "Can I take pictures of Mommy's flowers to show them?" Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. This simple question contained so much: Emma's connection to her mother's memory, her willingness to share that memory with others, her tentative reach toward a wider world. "Of course you can," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can take pictures of anything you want to share." "And Sarah," Emma turned to her, eyes serious, "will you still be here after school?" "Always," Sarah promised without hesitation. "This is home now." The word home hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Alexander's hand found Sarah's behind Emma's back, their fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably. Emma noticed the gesture and smiled, one of her new, real smiles that transformed her whole face. "Can we visit?" she asked. "To see the light?" "Tomorrow," Alexander agreed. "We'll all go together." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah found Alexander in Claire's art studio. He stood by the easel looking at Emma's collage, which he had carefully pinned there. "She's ready," Sarah said softly, joining him. "She's stronger than we sometimes remember." Alexander turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "We're all stronger together," he said. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've—" She stopped him with a gentle touch to his arm. "You don't need to thank me. Being here, being part of this, it's everything I never knew I was looking for." Their eyes met in the soft studio light, and something shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained began to dissolve. Alexander's hand came up to cup her cheek, and Sarah leaned into the touch, her heart racing. But before either could move closer, a small sound made them turn. Emma stood in the doorway in her star-patterned pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. Instead of embarrassment at finding them in such an intimate moment, her face showed only contentment. "I can't sleep," she said. "Can we play the lullaby?" And so they moved to the music room, where the piano waited uncovered, ready for their evening ritual. As Emma and Sarah played their simple duet, Alexander watched his daughter's confident fingers on the keys, seeing not just who she was, but who she was becoming. The music filled Willow Heights with its gentle harmony, a promise of new beginnings and continued growth. Tomorrow they would visit Riverside Academy, taking another step into their expanding world. But for now, in this moment, they were complete. 3 hearts beating in sync, creating their own unique melody. Riverside Academy stood on a gentle slope overlooking a winding river, its red brick buildings softened by climbing ivy and morning mist. As they drove through the wrought iron gates, Sarah felt Emma's hand tighten in hers. The girl sat between them in the back seat of Alexander's car, her choice, seeking comfort in their shared presence. Martha had packed Emma's favorite snacks and her art supplies, understanding that familiar objects would help ease the anxiety of this new experience. The old housekeeper had hugged them all before they left, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Everything will be just fine," she had whispered to Emma. "Your mother always said that the bravest adventures start with a single step." Now, as they parked in front of the main building, Sarah could feel the tension in Emma's small frame. But there was something else too, a spark of curiosity that hadn't been there during their previous attempts at school visits. "Remember," Sarah said softly, "we're just looking today. Like when we explore the garden at home." Emma nodded, her free hand reaching into her pocket where she kept her latest origami crane, a talisman of comfort she had started carrying everywhere. Alexander came around to open their door, and together they formed a protective circle around Emma as they approached the entrance. The school's director, Dr. Helena Rivera, met them in a sun-filled atrium where a small fountain created soothing water music. Emma's attention immediately went to the play of light on water, her eyes tracking the patterns with familiar intensity. "Welcome to Riverside," Dr. Rivera said warmly, speaking directly to Emma rather than over her head to the adults. "Would you like to see where we make music?" Emma looked up at Sarah and Alexander, seeking reassurance. When they both nodded encouragingly, she took a small step forward. "Do you have a piano?" she asked quietly. "We have several," Dr. Rivera smiled, "including one that belonged to a famous composer. Would you like to see it?" As they followed Dr. Rivera through the school's corridors, Sarah noticed how everything was designed to be gentle on the senses. Soft, natural lighting, muted colors, and subtle textural elements that invited touch without overwhelming. Emma's grip on her hand gradually relaxed as they walked. The music room took their breath away. Tall windows overlooked the river, and instruments of all kinds were arranged in inviting groupings. But it was the grand piano that drew Emma's attention, a beautiful Steinway that gleamed in the morning light. "Would you like to play something?" Dr. Rivera asked, noting Emma's obvious interest. Emma looked at Sarah, their special connection evident in the silent exchange. Together, they approached the piano, sitting side by side on the bench as they had so many times at home. As they began their familiar lullaby, Sarah noticed Alexander wiping his eyes discreetly. "She's quite talented," Dr. Rivera observed quietly to Alexander. "Our music therapy program could really help her develop these skills." But Alexander was barely listening, transfixed by the sight of his daughter completely at ease in this new space, her music flowing freely. When the song ended, Emma actually smiled at Dr. Rivera, a rare gift she usually reserved for family. "Would you like to see the art studio now?" Dr. Rivera asked. "It's right next door." The art studio was a space of pure possibility. Easels arranged to catch the best light, shelves filled with supplies, and walls covered with student artwork. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of a paper folding station, complete with origami papers in every color imaginable. "Look," she whispered to Sarah, pointing to a mobile of paper cranes hanging from the ceiling. "They make birds too." As Emma explored the studio, touching papers and examining paintbrushes, Alexander pulled Sarah aside. "I've never seen her so comfortable in a new place," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's like they designed it just for her." Sarah watched as Emma carefully folded a sheet of blue paper, her movements precise and confident. "They understand her way of seeing the world," she said softly. "They're not trying to change her. Just give her space to grow." Dr. Rivera showed them other spaces, quiet rooms for when students needed breaks, a sensory garden where children could tend plants, and small classroom pods where learning was tailored to each child's pace. Throughout the tour, Emma remained engaged, asking questions in her careful way and taking everything in. Near the end of their visit, in the library filled with comfortable reading nooks, Emma tugged on Alexander's sleeve. "Daddy," she said, "clearly I want to try." Alexander knelt down to her level, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure, sweetheart? There's no rush." Emma nodded, then turned to Sarah. "Will you help me practice before I start?" "Of course," Sarah promised, her heart full of pride at Emma's courage. "We can practice everything, new routines, new spaces, whatever you need." As they prepared to leave, Emma surprised them all by handing Dr. Rivera the origami crane. She had made a gesture of trust that brought tears to the director's eyes. "For your collection," Emma said simply, pointing to a shelf where other students had left small treasures. In the car ride home, Emma sat quietly between them, processing the morning's experiences in her methodical way. But her hands were relaxed, in her lap, and she hummed their lullaby softly to herself, signs that Sarah had learned to read as contentment. "She's going to be all right, isn't she?" Alexander whispered to Sarah over Emma's head. Sarah watched as Emma traced the passing scenery with her finger, creating patterns only she could see. "More than all right," she replied. "She's going to soar." The autumn sun broke through the morning, mist as they drove home, painting the world in warm, promising light. In the back seat of the car, 3 hearts beat with shared hope, a family finding its way forward together, one careful step at a time. The preparations for Emma's first day at Riverside Academy had transformed Willow Heights into a hub of gentle activity. Sarah sat cross-legged on Emma's bedroom floor, helping her arrange her new school supplies in perfect symmetry, colored pencils aligned by shade, notebooks stacked by size, and origami papers sorted by pattern. "What if the lights are different?" Emma asked, carefully placing her favorite blue pencil in its designated spot. It wasn't the first time she'd voiced this concern, but Sarah had learned that Emma needed to process her anxieties through repetition. "Remember what Dr. Rivera showed us," Sarah replied patiently. "You have your special card that you can show any teacher if you need to use the quiet room. And look," she pulled out a small solar-powered light they had bought together. "This can be your own little sun, just in case." Emma took the light, turning it over in her hands. "Like Mommy's stars," she said softly, referring to the glow in the dark. Stars Claire had once painted on her ceiling. The connection made Sarah's heart ache with tenderness. A knock at the door drew their attention. Alexander stood there, holding something behind his back. "I found something in the attic," he said, entering the room. "I think it was waiting for the right moment." He revealed a vintage leather backpack, its surface soft with age but still beautiful. Emma's eyes widened in recognition. "Mommy's art bag." "She used it all through art school," Alexander explained, sitting down beside them. "She always said it was her lucky charm. Would you like to use it for your art supplies?" Emma reached for the bag with reverent hands, her fingers tracing, the subtle flower design embedded in the leather. Inside, she found a small surprise, a hidden pocket containing one of Claire's old sketching pencils. "It's perfect," Emma whispered, carefully transferring her art supplies into the bag. Each item was placed with deliberate care, creating a new order that incorporated this precious piece of her mother's legacy. Sarah watched father and daughter share this moment, feeling privileged to witness their healing. When Emma discovered a small note tucked into another pocket, one of Claire's old reminders to herself about color theory, she didn't retreat into silence as she might have months ago. Instead, she read it aloud, her voice clear and steady. "Remember, every shadow needs light to dance." Later that evening, after Emma had finally fallen asleep with the backpack placed carefully beside her bed, Sarah found Alexander in Claire's art studio. He stood by the windows, looking out at the garden where the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall. "Thank you," he said as she joined him, "for everything you've done for us. For her." Sarah's heart quickened at his proximity, at the warmth in his voice. "You don't need to thank me. Being here, being part of your lives, it's given me more than I could ever give back." Alexander turned to face her, his eyes intense in the fading light. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "These past months, watching you with Emma, seeing how you've helped us both come alive again, I've realized that what I feel for you is more than gratitude." Sarah felt the world slow around them, every heartbeat distinct and precious. "Alexander, I know it's complicated," he continued softly. "I know there's so much to consider, but I can't ignore what's growing between us anymore. When I see you with Emma, when we share these moments as a family, it feels right. It feels like home," Sarah finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire being. "Yes, home. And I think Claire would understand. She always said that love multiplies, it doesn't divide." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as Alexander's free hand came up to cup her face. "I've tried so hard to do the right thing," she admitted, "to be what Emma needs, to respect Claire's memory." "You've done more than that," Alexander interrupted gently. "You've helped us honor her memory by teaching us how to live again, how to love again." Their first kiss was soft, tentative, filled with both promise and reverence for all that had brought them to this moment. When they parted, Sarah rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the quiet studio. A small sound made them turn. Emma stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed elephant. But instead of uncertainty or confusion, her face showed only peaceful acceptance. "I knew," she said simply, padding over to them. "I saw it in the music." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, her heart full of love and concern. How do you feel about that, sweetheart? Emma looked between them, her expression thoughtful. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 origami cranes, one made from sheet music, the other from one of Claire's old sketches. She placed them side by side on Claire's easel. "They can fly together," she said with the simple wisdom of a child who understood more than anyone had realized. Like harmony. Alexander joined them, kneeling beside Sarah. Emma looked at her father, then at Sarah, before speaking again. "Mommy always said love is like her garden. There's room for new flowers to grow." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears as Emma stepped forward to hug them both. They stayed like that for a long moment, 3 hearts beating in sync, while outside the studio windows, the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, a silent witness to this new chapter in their story. As they walked Emma back to bed, her small hand held firmly in each of theirs, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. They weren't trying to replace what was lost, but building something new, a love that honored the past while embracing the future, just as the strongest gardens incorporate old growth and new blooms into one beautiful whole. The morning of UAE. Emma's first day at Riverside Academy dawned clear and bright, autumn sunshine streaming through the windows of Willow Heights. Sarah woke early to find the kitchen already alive with activity. Martha was preparing Emma's favorite breakfast, while Alexander sorted through a pile of forms with careful attention. "She's been up since 5, Martha whispered to Sarah, nodding toward the music room, where the soft sounds of Emma's practice drifted through the house. Playing her special song over and over, it calms her. Sarah understood immediately. Music had become Emma's anchor, her way of steadying herself in moments of uncertainty. She headed to the music room, pausing in the doorway to watch Emma's careful fingers move across the keys. "Room for a duet?" Sarah asked softly. Emma nodded without stopping, and Sarah slipped onto the bench beside her. Together they played their lullaby, their hands moving in perfect synchronization. As the final notes faded, Emma leaned against Sarah's side. "What if I forget the words?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Sarah turned slightly to face her. "You know what I think? I think words aren't the only way to speak. You have your music, your art, your beautiful origami birds. Those speak louder than words sometimes." Emma considered this, her fingers tracing the piano keys without pressing. "Them. Like how you and Daddy spoke without words before yesterday?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the innocent observation. "Yes, exactly like that. Sometimes our hearts know how to speak in ways our mouths can't explain." Alexander appeared in the doorway, carrying Claire's old backpack now filled with Emma's carefully chosen supplies. "Ready for breakfast, sweetheart? Martha made your favorite apple pancakes." As they sat around the kitchen table, Sarah noticed how Emma arranged her pancakes in a precise pattern before eating them, cutting each piece into exactly the same size. These familiar rituals seemed to give her strength, preparing her for the changes ahead. "I put something special in your bag," Martha said as she refilled Emma's juice. "That tea we make together when you need a quiet moment. And I labeled it just like we practiced." Emma's face brightened. She had been working with Martha in the kitchen more often lately, learning to prepare simple things for herself, another step toward independence that filled them all with pride. The drive to Riverside Academy was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Emma sat between Sarah and Alexander in the back seat again, one hand holding Sarah's, while the other clutched the origami crane she had chosen as her good luck charm for the day. This one made from a page of The Little Prince, the story, that had first brought them together in the garden. As they pulled up to the school, Dr. Rivera was waiting to greet them, her warm smile helping to ease some of the tension. "Good morning, Emma. We have your special seat ready in the music room, right by the window where you can see the river." Emma's grip on Sarah's hand tightened momentarily, then deliberately relaxed. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a carefully folded paper flower. She had spent the previous evening making them as gifts for her new teachers. "It's beautiful," Dr. Rivera exclaimed, admiring the intricate folds. "Would you like to show me how you made it during art time today?" Emma nodded, then turned to face her father and Sarah. The moment they had all been both anticipating and dreading had arrived. But instead of panic or retreat, Emma showed them how far she had come. "I can do this," she said firmly, though her voice quivered slightly, "because I have two hearts now, one here and one at home." Alexander knelt down to hug her, his eyes bright with tears. "You've always been the bravest person I know," he whispered, "just like your mother." Sarah joined them, completing their circle of love and support. "And we'll be right here when school ends," she promised, "ready to hear all about your adventure." Emma straightened her shoulders, adjusting the strap of Claire's backpack. "Mommy's stars will watch me," she said, touching the hidden pocket where she had stored her solar-powered light, "and your love will keep me safe." They watched as she walked into the school beside Dr. Rivera, her steps steady and purposeful. At the door, she turned to wave. Not a frantic goodbye, but a confident gesture that spoke of her growing strength. Alexander's hand found Sarah's as they stood in the autumn sunshine, their fingers intertwining naturally. "She's going to be okay," he said, his voice full of wonder and pride. "More than okay," Sarah agreed, leaning into his warmth. "She's going to flourish." As they walked back to the car, they passed the school's garden where late roses still bloomed. Alexander paused to pick one, handing it to Sarah with a soft smile. "Claire would have loved this moment," he said. "She always believed in new beginnings." Sarah accepted the rose, understanding that it represented more than just a flower. It was an acknowledgement of how love could grow in unexpected places, how hearts could heal and expand to embrace new joy while honoring cherished memories. The car, they sat close together, their shared silence full of hope and possibility. The morning sun painted the world in promising light, while somewhere inside Riverside Academy, a little girl with her mother's backpack and her father's courage was taking her first steps into a wider world, carried forward by the love of both, her past and her present. The autumn weeks flew by in a whirlwind of change and adaptation. Emma's transition to Riverside Academy had gone more smoothly than any of them had dared to hope, though each day brought its own unique challenges and triumphs. On this particular afternoon, Sarah sat in the music room, sorting through the growing collection of Emma's school artwork, when she heard unexpected laughter from the garden. Following the sound, she found Emma and her new friend Sophie sitting cross-legged under the oak tree, surrounded by origami papers. Sophie, a quiet girl from Emma's art therapy class, shared Emma's love for precise folds and patterns. Their friendship had developed naturally, built on shared understanding and peaceful creativity. "Sarah," Emma called out, her voice carrying a new confidence that still made Sarah's heart swell. "Sophie's teaching me a new crane design, look!" The two girls held up their creations. Sophie's was a traditional crane with an elegant neck, while Emma's had wings that curved like musical notes. The sight of them working together, each adapting the art form to their own vision while respecting the other's style, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "They're beautiful," she said, kneeling beside them. "Would you like to hang them in the music room?" Sophie looked up shyly. "Could we put them by the piano? Emma told me about your special song." Before Sarah could respond, Emma was already explaining their lullaby to Sophie, her words flowing more freely than they ever had before. "It's like a story without words," she said, her hands moving in gentle waves. "Sarah taught me how to make the music speak when I couldn't." The moment was interrupted by Martha calling from the kitchen door. "Girls, the cookies are ready." As they gathered their art supplies, Sarah noticed how Emma automatically helped Sophie organize the papers, in a way that would make sense to both of them, a small but significant sign of her growing emotional intelligence. The girls headed inside, their heads close together, as they discussed plans for their next origami project. Alexander found Sarah still standing in the garden, watching the space where the girls had been. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked softly, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about how far she's come," Sarah replied, leaning into his embrace. 6 months ago, the idea of Emma having a friend over would have seemed impossible. Now look at her, teaching, sharing, connecting. Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thanks to you." Thanks to all of us, Sarah corrected gently. We're a team, remember? Inside, they found Emma showing Sophie Claire's old art studio. The room had gradually transformed over the past months, becoming a space that honored Claire's memory while embracing new creativity. Emma's artwork now hung alongside her mother's, creating a beautiful dialogue between past and present. My mum loved colors too, Sophie was saying, examining one of Claire's paintings. Before she got sick. Now she can't paint anymore, but she helps me choose colors for my origami. Sarah felt Alexander tense beside her, both of them recognizing the weight of this shared understanding between the girls. Emma was quiet for a moment, then went to her special drawer where she kept her most precious art supplies. Here, she said, holding out a set of Claire's professional watercolors to Sophie. We can share them. Colors are better when they're shared. The simple gesture carried such profound meaning that Sarah had to turn away to hide her tears. Alexander squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening. Later that evening, after Sophie had gone home with a carefully wrapped package of cookies and new origami papers, Emma sat at the piano, playing a slightly modified version of their lullaby. It's different, Sarah observed, sitting beside her. Emma nodded, her fingers continuing their dance across the keys. I added a new part. For Sophie, and for Mommy, and for us. The melody wove together elements of their original lullaby with a new bridge that somehow managed to sound both melancholic and hopeful. Alexander joined them, drawn by the music as he so often was these days. What do you think, Daddy? Emma asked, looking up at him with clear eyes. Do you think Mommy would like it? Alexander knelt beside the piano bench, his face full of love and pride. She would love it, sweetheart. Just like she would love seeing you share her art supplies. With Sophie, you know what she always said about creativity? That it grows bigger when you share it, Emma and Sarah said together, then laughed at their synchronicity. Emma played the new melody again, this time humming along. I'm going to teach it to Sophie, she announced. Her mom can't paint anymore, but maybe she can learn to play. Then she'll have colors in music instead of paint. Sarah watched as Emma continued to play, her confidence growing with each note. The girl who had once been locked in silence was now thinking about teaching others, about sharing her gifts, about helping a friend find new ways to express herself. Alexander pulled Sarah close, both of them overwhelmed by the beauty of their daughter's growing heart. Yes, their daughter, for that's what Emma had become to Sarah, not through any official declaration, but through the quiet accumulation of moments like these, through shared music and art and understanding. As the evening light painted the music room in soft gold, Emma's new melody filled the air, a testament to how love could transform and grow, how healing could come in unexpected ways, and how the heart's capacity for joy was limitless when given the chance to bloom. The idea came to Emma during one of her quiet moments in Claire's garden, where she now spent time with both Sarah and Sophie, teaching her friend about her mother's favorite flowers. She had been arranging fallen petals into intricate patterns when the thought bloomed in her mind, as natural as the roses surrounding her. That evening, as Sarah helped her prepare for bed, Emma asked a question that made time stand still. Sarah, when are you going to really be my mom? Sarah's hands froze in the middle of braiding Emma's hair. Through the mirror, their eyes met. Emma's clear and certain, Sarah's filled with sudden tears. Oh, sweetheart. You already are in here, Emma continued, placing a hand over her heart. And in the music. And in the way you and Daddy look at each other. So why not everywhere else too? Sarah turned Emma gently to face her, choosing her words carefully. Those are very big thoughts you're having. Have you talked to your daddy about this? Emma's face took on the focused expression she got when working on a particularly challenging piece of music. Not yet. I wanted to ask you first, because... She hesitated, then continued with determined clarity. Because I needed to know if... You want to be my mom before I ask Daddy to make it real. The wisdom and sensitivity in Emma's approach brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. This child, who had once been locked in silence, was now teaching her about love and courage. Emma, Sarah began, her voice thick with emotion. Being your mom would be the greatest gift I could ever receive. but it's not just about what I want. It's about you and your daddy and Mommy Claire, Emma finished softly. I know, but look. She slipped off her bed and went to her desk, pulling out a drawing she had been working on in art therapy. It showed 4 figures, Emma in the center, Alexander and Sarah on either side, and above them, rendered in gentle watercolors, was Claire, surrounded by stars. See? Emma pointed to the drawing. We can all be family. Different kinds of love can exist together, like harmony in music. Sarah gathered Emma into her arms, overwhelmed by the pure wisdom of her heart. When did you get so wise? She whispered into Emma's hair. From watching you and Daddy learn to love again, Emma replied simply. And from remembering how Mommy, Claire taught me that love is like a garden, always room for more flowers. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah found Alexander in his study. Her heart was full of Emma's words, of the drawing, of the possibility that had been growing between them all these months. Alexander, she began, but he held up a hand, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. Before you say anything, he said, there's something I need to show you. He led her to Claire's art studio, which had become a shared space for all their creative endeavors. But tonight it was transformed. Tiny lights twinkled from every surface, reminiscent of Claire's painted stars, and in the center stood Emma's easel, holding a large canvas covered by a cloth. Emma's not the only one who's been working on something, Alexander said softly, removing the cloth to reveal a painting, his first attempt at art since Claire's passing. Sarah gasped. The painting was simple but powerful. 3 sets of hands intertwined, surrounded by musical notes and origami cranes in flight. In the background, subtle brushstrokes suggested Claire's garden in full bloom. I've been taking lessons, Alexander admitted. In secret. Emma's art teacher has been helping me because I wanted to ask you something, and I wanted to do it in a way that honored all of us, past and present. He took Sarah's hands in his, leading her to stand before the painting. Sarah Chen, you came into our lives when we were lost in silence, and you taught us how to sing again. You helped my daughter find her voice, and you helped me remember how to love. Will you marry us? Will you make this harmony complete? Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she looked at the painting, at their entwined hands, at the love shining in Alexander's eyes. Emma asked me tonight if I wanted to be her mom, she whispered. Alexander's eyes widened. She did? Sarah nodded, laughing through her tears. Like father, like daughter, you both chose the same night to ask. And? Alexander's voice was tender, hopeful. Yes, Sarah said simply. Yes to being Emma's mom. Yes to being your wife. Yes to this beautiful, complex, wonderful family we've created together. Their kiss was interrupted by a small sound from the doorway. Emma stood there in her star-patterned pajamas, clutching her drawing from earlier. I couldn't sleep, she said, but her smile suggested she had been waiting for this moment. She padded over to them, holding out her drawing. Now we can hang them together, she said, pointing to Alexander's painting. The whole story. As they stood together, arms around each other, looking at the 2 pieces of art that told their family's journey, Sarah felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Love had brought them together, not to replace what was lost, but to create something new and beautiful from the pieces of their hearts. Outside, the autumn wind stirred Claire's garden, carrying the sweet scent of roses through the open studio window. And somewhere in the infinite space between stars, they could all feel Claire's blessing surrounding them like a warm embrace. The weeks leading up to the wedding transformed Willow Heights into a gentle whirlwind of activity. Rather than hiring a professional wedding planner, the family had decided to create their celebration together, making every detail personal and meaningful. The garden, where their story had begun, would host the intimate ceremony. On this particular morning, Sarah found Emma and Sophie sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by origami paper in shades of blue and gold. The girls were creating delicate paper flowers that would be incorporated into the wedding decorations. Look, Emma said, holding up a perfectly folded rose. We're making them like Mommy Claire's garden, but in paper, so they'll last forever. Sophie nodded enthusiastically, adding, and we're putting music paper inside some of them so they'll have your special song too. Sarah watched as the girls worked together, marveling at how their friendship had deepened. Sophie had become a regular presence at Willow Heights, her quiet understanding and creative spirit fitting perfectly into their family dynamic. "Those are beautiful," Martha commented, setting down a plate of fresh cookies. The old housekeeper had been glowing with happiness since the engagement announcement, throwing herself into wedding preparations with joyful enthusiasm. "Just like the ones your mother used to press in her books, Emma." Emma's eyes lit up. "Her flower books. Daddy, can we look at them?" Alexander, who had just entered the kitchen, smiled warmly. "Of course, sweetheart, they're in the studio." Together they all migrated to Claire's art studio, which had become the heart of their wedding planning. Emma carefully retrieved her mother's old botanical books from the shelf, handling them with reverent familiarity. "Here," she said, opening to a page where pressed roses still held their shape. "We can make our paper flowers look like these, and look," she pointed to Claire's elegant handwriting in the margins. She wrote about what each flower means. Sarah leaned in to read the notation: "Roses for love, baby's breath for pure hearts, and forget-me-nots for memories that live forever in love." "Can we use all of those?" Emma asked, looking between Sarah and her father, "to show how different kinds of love can grow together?" Alexander wrapped an arm around Sarah's waist, both of them touched by Emma's thoughtful suggestion. "That's perfect, sweetheart," he said. "Just like your mother always said, a garden grows more beautiful with variety." Sophie, who had been quietly studying the pressed flowers, spoke up. "My mom says that too, about how love is like her favorite quilt, made of different pieces but stronger together." Emma reached for her friend's hand, understanding in her eyes. Both girls had learned early about life's complexities, about how love could transform and grow in unexpected ways. Later that afternoon, Dr. Rivera visited to discuss Emma's progress at school. She found them all in the music room, where Emma and Sophie were teaching Sarah a new piece they had composed together. "This is wonderful," Dr. Rivera said, listening to the girls play. "Emma, your music teacher tells me you've been helping other students learn to express themselves through sound." Emma nodded, her fingers still moving over the keys. "Sometimes words are hard," she explained, "but music always understands." The simple wisdom of her statement brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She remembered the silent child she had first met, in the garden, and marveled at the confident young girl who now helped others find their voice. As evening approached, Sophie's mother came to pick her up. Christine, still recovering from her illness but growing stronger, shared a knowing look with Sarah. Both women understood the healing power of love, how it could bridge gaps and mend hearts in unexpected ways. "The girls have been working on a surprise for the wedding," Christine confided softly. Sophie can hardly contain her excitement. After their guests had left, Emma led Sarah and Alexander to the garden. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of late-blooming roses. String lights twinkled in the trees, Martha's contribution to the wedding preparations. "I want to show you something," Emma said, pulling out her notebook. She had drawn a detailed plan for the ceremony, complete with where each type of paper flower would go. But what caught Sarah's breath was the special addition Emma had designed. "See?" She pointed to a space near the altar. "We'll hang Mommy Claire's wind chimes here so their music can be part of our song. And look," she turned the page to reveal a sketch of 3 origami cranes, each carrying a ribbon. "These will hold our rings, because cranes mate for life, and they always find their way home." Alexander knelt beside his daughter, gathering her into a tight embrace. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Emma nodded against his shoulder. "I want it to be perfect, not just the regular kind of perfect, but our kind, where everything has a story and a meaning." Sarah joined them, completing their family circle. Above them, the first stars began to appear, twinkling like the lights in the trees. The wind stirred Claire's chimes, creating a gentle melody that seemed to bless their preparations. "It will be perfect," Sarah assured her, "because, it's coming from our hearts, all of our hearts." They stayed in the garden until twilight deepened, planning and dreaming together. Emma's notebook lay open on her lap, its pages filled with drawings of flowers and music notes, of family and future, of love that grew like Claire's garden, wild and free yet tenderly tended, with room for every beautiful possibility. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, autumn sunlight filtering through the changing leaves of Willow Heights' ancient trees. Sarah stood at her guest house window, watching early light paint the garden where workers were setting up the last of the decorations. Emma's carefully planned paper flowers caught the sun, their delicate petals glowing like stained glass. Soft knock at the door revealed Martha, carrying a special delivery. "From Emma," she said, holding out an origami crane made from sheet music. Inside, Sarah found a note written in Emma's careful handwriting. "For my new mum, who taught me that love speaks in many languages." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as she carefully placed the crane on her dressing table. Another knock brought Sophie and Christine, carrying the dress they had all helped design, a simple, elegant gown in ivory silk with subtle musical notes, embroidered along the hem, each one stitched by Emma's own hands. "Emma's in the studio," Sophie reported, her eyes shining with excitement. "She's putting the finishing touches on your surprise." In the main house, Alexander stood in his study, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. A framed photo of Claire caught his eye. She was laughing in the garden, her arms full of roses. "We're doing all right," he whispered to her image. "You'd be so proud of our girl." As if summoned by his thoughts, Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her carefully chosen outfit, a blue dress that matched the forget-me-nots in Claire's garden, with origami flowers in her hair. "Daddy," she said softly, "I have something to show you, both of you." She led Alexander to Claire's art studio, where Sarah was just arriving, escorted by Martha. The studio had been transformed. Emma's artwork covered the walls, not just recent pieces, but a chronological journey of their family's story. It began with her early drawings of silence and isolation, progressing through the first tentative connections with Sarah, blossoming into the vibrant expressions of love and family they had become. But the centerpiece took their breath away. On Claire's easel stood a large canvas, clearly painted by Emma, but showing sophistication beyond her years. It depicted the garden at twilight, with three distinct but interconnected elements: Claire's roses climbing toward stars, musical notes floating on the wind, and origami cranes taking flight. In the foreground, three figures stood hand in hand, while a fourth figure, painted in gossamer brushstrokes that seemed to shimmer, watched over them with a gentle smile. "It's all of us," Emma explained, her voice clear and strong. "Because love doesn't divide, it multiplies. That's what Mummy Claire always said, and now I understand what she meant." Sarah knelt beside Emma, too moved for words. Alexander joined them, gathering both his daughters. Yes, for that's what Sarah had truly become to Emma, into his arms. "There's more," Emma said, leading them to the piano. "Sophie helped me with this part." She sat at the piano and began to play. The familiar notes of their lullaby filled the air, but it had evolved into something richer, more complex. As she played, Sophie entered with her violin, adding a new voice to the melody. The music wrapped around them like an embrace, incorporating themes from Claire's favorite songs, their special lullaby, and something entirely new, a bridge between past and present, a promise of future joy. "This is our wedding song," Emma announced as the final notes faded. "Do you like it?" "Like it?" Sarah whispered, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Oh, Emma." "It's perfect. It's us." The ceremony itself was intimate and deeply personal. The garden glowed with autumn colors and twinkling lights. Paper flowers danced in the breeze alongside real blooms, and Claire's wind chimes added their gentle voice to the proceedings. Emma and Sophie played their special composition as Sarah walked down the petal-strewn path. Alexander waited beneath an arch of roses and origami cranes, his eyes filled with love and wonder. Emma stood beside him, holding a small basket of paper flowers and real petals mixed together. Just like their family, she had explained. Different, elements creating something beautiful. When it came time for the vows, Emma surprised them all by stepping forward with her own piece of paper. "I have promises too," she declared. "I promise to keep making music with you, Sarah, and to help you learn all of Daddy's favorite songs. I promise to share Mommy Claire's garden with you, and to help you understand her special language of flowers. And I promise to keep teaching you about love, just like you taught me about harmony." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden, as Sarah and Alexander exchanged their own vows, their words weaving together promises of love, understanding, and growth. The origami cranes carried their rings, Emma's special touch, and when they were finally pronounced a family, Claire's wind chimes rang out as if in blessing. As twilight painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the small gathering celebrated in the garden. Emma and Sophie played their composition again, this time with Sarah joining them on the portable keyboard they had set up outside. Alexander watched his family, all of his family, including Claire's gentle presence in every bloom and breeze, and felt his heart could burst with joy. Later, as stars began to appear above Willow Heights, Emma found a quiet moment with her parents. "Look," she said, pointing upward, "Mommy's stars are dancing with our music." And indeed, the lights seemed to twinkle in time with the gentle melodies that still floated through the garden, creating a symphony of starlight and love, of memory and promise, of endings and beautiful new beginnings. Winter had transformed Willow Heights into a wonderland of frost and silver light. 3 months after the wedding, the household had settled into new rhythms, as natural as the changing seasons. Sarah had moved from the guest house into the main house, bringing with her the warmth and music that had become essential to their family's harmony. On this particular morning, Emma stood at her bedroom window, watching snowflakes dance in the early light. Her room had undergone a subtle transformation. Much like the rest of the house, Claire's painted stars still glowed on the ceiling, but now they shared space with origami mobiles and musical notes that Sarah had helped her paint along the walls. Photos old and new captured different chapters of their family's story. Claire reading in the garden, Emma and Sarah at the piano, Alexander teaching them both to paint, Sophie visiting for their weekly music sessions. "Emma," Sarah's voice called softly from the doorway, "ready for our surprise?" Emma turned, her face lighting up. She and Sarah had been working on a special project in secret, waiting for the perfect moment to share it with Alexander. Today, with the first real snow of winter transforming their world, felt right. They found Alexander in the kitchen, sharing his usual morning coffee with Martha. The old housekeeper had recently started teaching Emma how to bake Claire's favorite recipes, adding another layer to their growing family traditions. "Daddy," Emma announced, practically bouncing with excitement, "we have something to show you." They led him to the music room, where the morning light filtered through frost-painted windows. The piano stood in its usual place, but beside it now sat a new addition, a violin stand. "I've been taking lessons," Emma explained, picking up the instrument that Sophie had helped her choose. "Sarah and Sophie have been teaching me, and I wrote something for us." Alexander sat in his usual chair, emotion clear on his face as Emma positioned the violin under her chin. Sarah took her place at the piano, and together they began to play. The melody started with their familiar lullaby, but evolved into something more complex. The violin carried Claire's favorite classical piece, while the piano wove in their special song. The two instruments danced around each other, separate but harmonious, telling the story of their family in music. As they played, Emma's confidence grew. Her bow moved more surely, her notes becoming clearer and stronger. When they reached the E, bridge, the part Emma had composed herself, Alexander gasped softly. The new melody incorporated elements of a song he had forgotten about, one Claire used to hum while working in her garden. "How did you remember that tune?" he asked when they finished, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't, not really," Emma admitted. "But sometimes when I'm in the garden I hear it in the wind chimes, and Sarah helped me write it down." Sarah moved to stand beside Alexander, their hands finding each other naturally. "Emma's been working so hard," she said softly. "She wanted to find a way to play music with both her mothers. The simple way Sarah acknowledged Claire's continued presence in their lives, without jealousy or hesitation, made Alexander love her even more. Emma put down her violin and joined them, completing their family circle. "I have one more surprise," she said, pulling out a carefully folded paper from her pocket. It was a letter from Riverside Academy. Her music teacher had recommended her for an advanced program. "They want me to play in the spring concert," Emma explained. "With Sophie. We'll perform our own composition." Alexander read the letter, pride shining in his eyes. "A duet?" "Actually," Emma corrected, a small smile playing on her lips, "it's a family piece. I wrote parts for Sarah too, and—" She hesitated, then continued bravely, "There's a paint and light show that goes with it. I thought maybe you could help with that part, Daddy, since you've been practicing with colors so much." The mention of Alexander's growing artistic endeavors, inspired by Emma's own journey back to creativity, brought smiles to all their faces. His paintings, while not as skilled as Claire's, had begun to fill empty spaces on the walls, adding his voice to their family's visual symphony. "I'd be honored," he said, pulling Emma close. "When do we start?" "Now?" Emma suggested hopefully. "Sophie's coming over later, and I thought maybe we could all work on it together, in the studio." The art studio had become their favorite family space, where Claire's presence felt strongest and most comforting. They spent countless hours there, painting, playing music, or simply being together, surrounded by the creative energy that seemed to flow through the room. As they made their way to the studio, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in a hallway. Mirror. Alexander with his arm around Emma, herself following with the violin carefully cradled in her arms. The image struck her suddenly as a perfect metaphor for their family, each carrying their own instrument, their own voice, but moving together in harmony. The studio welcomed them with winter light streaming through its tall windows, casting long shadows across canvases and musical scores. Emma immediately went to her special corner, where she kept her composition notebooks alongside Claire's old sketchbooks. "I've been thinking," she said, as she sorted through her papers, "about what Mommy Claire used to say about art being a conversation with the heart. Music is like that too, isn't it? A way for hearts to speak to each other." Sarah and Alexander exchanged glances, continually amazed by their daughter's depth of understanding. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah agreed. "That's exactly what it is." As Emma began to explain her vision for the spring concert, her words punctuated by graceful hand movements that seemed to paint the music in the air, Sarah felt the familiar wave of gratitude wash over her. Here in this room filled with art and memory and love, they had created something remarkable. A family that honored the past while embracing the future, where different kinds of love could coexist in perfect harmony. Outside, the snow continued to fall, adding another layer of quiet beauty to their world. Claire's wind chimes tinkled softly in the winter breeze, their gentle music mixing with the sound of Emma's violin as she demonstrated a particularly challenging passage. The entire scene felt like a painting come to life, one that Claire herself might have created, full of light and love and endless possibility. The weeks leading up to the spring concert transformed Willow Heights into a hub of creative energy. Every available surface in the art studio became covered with Emma and Alexander's sketches for the light show, while the music room rang with the sounds of practice sessions that often stretched into the evening hours. Sophie became an almost daily visitor, her quiet presence as natural as breathing in their household. The two girls worked tirelessly on their composition, their different styles complementing each other perfectly, Sophie's technical precision balancing Emma's emotional fluidity. "Watch this part," Emma said one afternoon, adjusting the lighting they had rigged up in the studio. As she played a particularly moving section on her violin, Alexander triggered the light sequence they had designed together. Colors danced across the walls in perfect synchronization with the music, telling their family's story in a visual symphony. Sarah, who had been watching from the doorway, felt her heart swell with pride. The shy, silent child she had first met in the garden had blossomed into a confident young artist, capable of expressing herself in multiple mediums. Even more remarkable was how Emma had learned to collaborate with others, to share her vision while remaining true to her unique way of seeing the world. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, entering the studio, "but don't forget we have another special project to work on too." Emma's eyes lit up. The garden. With spring approaching, they had begun preparing Claire's garden for its annual awakening. Emma had taken charge of the project, combining her mother's traditional plantings with new elements that represented their expanded family. A section for Sophie's favorite flowers, a small rock garden that Sarah had helped design, and a special area where they were experimenting with plants that responded to sound. "I found something in Mommy's garden journal," Emma said, pulling out a worn notebook. "Look," she wrote about wanting to create a musical garden with plants arranged like a symphony. Alexander joined them, reading over Emma's shoulder. "I remember her talking about that," he said softly. "She never had the chance to complete it. But we can," Emma declared, "for the concert. We can make the garden part of the performance." The idea took root and flourished, just like the early spring bulbs beginning to push through the winter soil. Emma and Sophie adapted their composition to incorporate outdoor elements, while Sarah and Alexander worked on extending the light show into the garden space. Martha contributed her own touches, helping Emma plant Claire's favorite night-blooming flowers in a pattern that mimicked musical notes. "Your mother would love this," she told Emma one evening as they worked together in the soft twilight. "She always said that gardens were nature's way of conducting symphony." The night before the concert, the family gathered in the garden for a final rehearsal. The evening was clear and mild, with the first stars beginning to appear above the trees. Emma and Sophie took their positions near Claire's rose arbor, while Sarah sat at the portable keyboard they had set up beside the pond. As they began to play, the garden came alive with their music. Lights danced through the trees, reflecting off the water and illuminating the carefully planned flower beds. The wind stirred Claire's chimes, adding their voice to the symphony. Alexander, watching from beside the roses that Claire had planted so many years ago, felt tears roll down his cheeks. But they were tears of joy, of wonder at how life could unfold in such unexpected and beautiful ways. Emma had insisted on one final practice session, wanting everything to be perfect for tomorrow. But as Sarah watched her daughter play, she realized that perfection wasn't about flawless execution. It was about the love and intention behind every note, every color, every carefully tended flower. After Sophie had gone home, Emma lingered in the garden, carefully adjusting the positions of her origami cranes that would be part of tomorrow's performance. Each one was made from a different kind of paper: music scores, art paper, pages from Claire's journals, and new sheets that Emma and Sarah had decorated together. "Do you think people will understand?" she asked, looking up at her parents, "about how different kinds of love can make beautiful music together?" Sarah knelt beside her, helping to secure a crane that had come loose in the evening breeze. "They'll understand, sweetheart, because you're not just playing music, you're sharing your heart." Alexander joined them, bringing with him Claire's old camera that Emma had asked to use for documenting the performance. "Your mother always said that true art speaks directly to the soul," he reminded them, "and what you've created here, it's pure soul." Emma looked around the garden at the lights they had strung through the trees, at the carefully planned flower beds waiting to bloom, at the origami cranes dancing in the gentle spring air. "It's not just what I created," she said thoughtfully. "It's what we all made together, like a family symphony." The phrase struck them all with its simple truth. They had indeed become a symphony, different instruments playing their own parts but creating something beautiful in their harmony. Claire's presence remained a constant note in their composition, while new melodies continued to develop and grow. As they walked back to the house, Emma between them holding both their hands, the garden seemed to glow with its own inner light. Tomorrow would bring the concert, a public sharing of their private joy. But tonight was just for them, a quiet moment of family harmony, as natural as the stars appearing in the darkening sky above Willow Heights. The evening of the spring concert arrived with perfect clarity, the air sweet with the scent of early blooms from Claire's garden. Riverside Academy's grounds had been Transformed according to Emma's vision, lights twinkled in the trees, origami cranes danced on invisible threads, and the garden paths were lined with paper flowers interspersed with real blooms. In the preparation room, Emma stood before the mirror in her performance dress, a creation that, like everything else about this evening, told their family's story. The deep blue fabric matched the forget-me-nots in Claire's garden, while delicate origami flowers adorned her hair. Sarah knelt beside her, making small adjustments to the dress's hem. "Nervous?" Sarah asked softly, noting the slight tremor in Emma's hands. Emma shook her head, then nodded, then smiled. "Good, nervous," she explained, "like music before it starts." Sophie appeared in the doorway, already holding her violin. Her presence had a calming effect on Emma, their shared understanding transcending words. "Dr. Rivera says they're ready for us to check the garden setup," she announced. The three of them made their way through the school's corridors to the garden entrance. Alexander waited there, holding Claire's old camera. He had been documenting every step of their preparation, creating a visual record of their journey to this moment. "Everything's perfect," he assured them, but Emma needed to see for herself. She walked the garden paths with focused attention, checking each light placement, every origami crane, all the angles they had practiced so carefully. The garden itself seemed to understand the importance of the evening. Claire's wind chimes sang softly in the gentle breeze, and the first star of evening appeared above the trees, like a spotlight from heaven, Martha had whispered earlier. As the audience began to arrive, filling the seats arranged around the garden's natural amphitheater, Emma and Sophie retreated to their starting position beneath the rose arbor. Sarah took her place at the keyboard, positioned so she could see both girls clearly. Dr. Rivera stepped forward to introduce the performance, but Emma had requested minimal explanation. She wanted the music and light to tell their story in their own way. The garden fell silent as Emma lifted her violin. In that moment of perfect stillness, she felt everything align, her past and present, her two mothers' influences, her father's love, her friendship with Sophie, the music in her heart. Then she began to play. The first notes rose clear and pure in the evening air, Claire's lullaby transformed by Emma's violin into something both familiar and new. Sophie's violin joined in, adding layers of harmony that spoke of friendship and understanding. Then Sarah's piano entered, weaving all the themes together into a tapestry of sound. As they played, Alexander conducted his part of the symphony, the light show they had created together. Colors danced through the garden, shifting and flowing with the music. Blues and golds for the early days of silence, warm roses and purples for Sarah's arrival, bright yellows and greens for new growth and healing. The audience sat spellbound as the performance unfolded. Emma's composition told their story without words, the loneliness of loss, the tentative steps toward connection, the blossoming of new love, the harmony of family recreated. Through it all ran the thread of Claire's presence, honored and celebrated in every note. When they reached the bridge Emma had composed, the part that incorporated the tune from Claire's garden, actual roses began to illuminate, tiny lights, hidden among their petals coming to life. The effect was magical, as if the flowers themselves were responding to the music. Sophie's violin sang of friendship and understanding, while Sarah's piano spoke of maternal love in all its forms. Emma's part soared above them both, connecting everything into a single, beautiful whole. The garden itself seemed to pulse with light and color, every element they had planned working in perfect synchronization. In the front row, Martha wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the little girl who had once been locked in silence transform into a confident young musician. Beside her, Christine, Sophie's mother, reached over to squeeze her hand in shared understanding. The final movement of their composition brought all the themes together, Claire's lullaby, their special song, the garden's melody, and something entirely new. As the music swelled, the lights reached their full brilliance, illuminating the entire garden. Origami cranes caught the light and seemed to take flight, their shadows dancing across the flower beds like birds of peace and promise. Emma's last note hung in the air like a star, pure and perfect. In the moment of silence that followed, she felt rather than saw her father's tears, sensed Sarah's pride and love, and somehow, in some indefinable way, felt her mother Claire's presence as clearly as the evening breeze. The applause when it came was thunderous, but Emma hardly heard it. She was looking at her family, at Sarah's radiant smile, at her father's proud tears, at Sophie's quiet joy. She was feeling the music that still seemed to pulse through the garden, through her heart, through the very air around them. Dr. Rivera stepped forward to present Emma and Sophie with bouquets, but Emma's attention was drawn to something else. In the last light of day, a single butterfly, the first she had seen this spring, danced through the illuminated roses, its wings catching the colors of their light show. "Look," she whispered to Sarah and her father as they came to embrace her. "Mommy sent us a sign." Alexander wrapped his arms around both his daughters, the one born of his love with Claire and the one born of music and healing. Above them, the first stars began to appear, twinkling in harmony with the garden lights, while Claire's wind chimes offered their gentle applause on the evening breeze. They had done more than create a performance. They had given voice to their journey, their love, their family's unique symphony, and in doing so, they had transformed their private healing into something universal, something that touched every heart that witnessed it. As the audience began to disperse, Emma remained in the garden with her family, holding both Sarah's and